Okay. Just give me a few seconds. Okay, thank you so much for everybody who is joining us in different part of the world. My name still remains Steven Ogutoyibo, and on today's show we will be
Stephen, you're on mute.
I have to quickly do it. Okay, so my name is Stephen Ogutoyibo. You're welcome on the show, and today we're going to be having a very interesting conversation with mixed Celmins, live and direct from Europe, and also I have with me my team mentor, role model, and a role model for a lot of young people. I'm always very jealous of her because of the passion that she has for young people. I would like to take this session to have our guests introduce themselves. I'd like to go to, I'll say women first anyway. Rhoda Robinson, would you like to introduce yourself within a few minutes?
Okay. Thank you, Stephen. It's always a pleasure to work with you on anything you're working on. My name is Rhoda Robinson. I am the Executive Director and co-founder of HACEY Health Initiative. HACEY is a development organization focused on empowering and supporting the underserved population in Africa to achieve a healthy and productive life. And our work revolves around health, empowerment, rights, education, basically the supporting governments and private sector to achieve and contribute to the sustainable development goals, especially goals 1 through to 10. As a development consultant, I specialize mostly on gender issues. I have a master's in gender and development from the University of Sussex, IDS. And over the last 15 years, I've worked primarily in the areas of gender development, gender-based violence, empowerment, education, rights issues as well. Currently, working on gender-based violence projects focused primarily on ending female genital mutilation, amongst a host of other projects where I work around Nigeria, working in over 13 states in the country, working with governments, working with private organizations, working with development organizations, both local and international, to ensure that no one falls through the cracks of development and everyone is able to live healthy and productive lives. So I'll stop there.
To say thank you so much, Rhoda, for that very brief introduction and straight to the point. Mix, Mix to introduce himself and tell us what project they're doing and who is Mix.
Thank you, Stephen. Good evening, everybody. Thank you, Rhoda, for your brief introduction. I think this is also the first time I meet you and I see you online. So very, very nice to meet you. So yes, as Stephen already mentioned, my name is Mix. I am originally from a country called Latvia, which is in north of Europe, in the Baltic region. And what I've been doing for the past a bit more than already 10 years with the organization called Make Room. We started Make Room in India back in 2015. And the idea of Make Room is that we create space for young individuals, and not only young individuals, but individuals who have some great ideas of how they can possibly contribute to solving some socially relevant issue within their community or within their town, city, region, district, does not matter. And what we do is that we help these young individuals to be able to identify this problem and then bring it together with like-minded individuals or stakeholders to help them basically come up with a solution to that specific problem. And we've been doing that for over the past 10 years. We've done it through various different projects and initiatives. One of the what Stephen already mentioned, the change makers room, that we do it every year in a different part of the globe. The one that Stephen mentioned was in Lagos in Nigeria a few years ago. I believe it was in 2017. Yes, and we have done it in India, and now we are also gearing towards them and want to do it in Rwanda. But because of COVID, we were not able to do it. But we really hope that that somehow this year or next year we will be able to manage to do that. So that's very briefly about myself.
All right, thank you so much, Mix. I'd like to go to another big mentor, the big fish in Nigeria in terms of advocacy space. I like to say the big shark in a swimming pool. Not a swimming pool, a big mighty ocean. I'd like to introduce Owonikoko, who is a world Dr. Owonikoko, who is a world-renowned social advocate, and also is the president of the U.S. Consulate Carrington Fellowship, and he also runs a non-profit sector organization that focuses on young people with disability. Owonikoko, in a brief, would you like to introduce yourself first?
Hi, Stephen. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you clearly.
Okay, great. I'm so excited to be here. Sorry, I joined a few minutes later. I struggled a bit with the internet, but I'm glad I'm here. And nice to meet you both. Again, Rhoda, my very good friend, and nice to meet you for the first time. I hope we'll have the time to, get to meet one another. Well, my name is Olusola Owonikoko, like Stephen mentioned. I am the executive director of Stanford Edge. So basically, Stanford Edge we work in the area of ICT4D, which is the use of ICT to drive development. And we do a bit of corporate sustainability, which is working with private sector to plan and implement social impact projects, high-level social impact projects across Nigeria. But I would like to focus more on the Project Enable Africa, which is a flagship initiative that promotes digital inclusion for persons with disabilities. And in the last 2 years, we have focused more on bridging the gap between the demand and supply of talent with disabilities in the formal and informal sector. Basically, we've been doing a lot to upskill young persons with disabilities across Nigeria and connect them to job opportunities. We do that almost on a sector by sector basis. We've worked with some of the top brands in the hospitality sector, in the tech sector. We are gradually moving into the finance and fast-moving consumer goods sector. So the goal for us is to make access to job opportunities and access to skills and employability in general, to make that accessible to every person, irrespective of their disability, because our vision is everybody should prosper, irrespective of if they have disability or not. And that's what we have done actively in the last 7 years. On the other end, I also lead a network, a very active network in Nigeria called the Carrington Fellowship Network, which Stephen mentioned earlier. Carrington Fellowship Network is a program of the United States Consulate here in Lagos State. Basically, what we focus on is empowering young persons across Nigeria to upskill and develop key leadership qualities, especially in the civic society. And of course, many of our program participants, alumni, Rhoda is an alumni, and Rhoda was in the position I was. He was a pioneer president of the organization. And I think, what she did is what we are building on today. So well done to you, Rhoda, for leading the organization. So basically, we are a group of young people that are doing great and creating organization, creating social impact projects, leading a lot of conversations across Nigeria, raising funds, creating employment. And I believe I'll be able to talk more about what we do as we go on. But in a nutshell, CIFI is a US consulate program that is upskilling young persons, especially through civic leadership, and giving them opportunity to create and run high impact development programs across Nigeria. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much, Owonikoko. Talking about impact, and we've seen in this time and age where we find different non-profit organizations springing up in different regions and different parts of the world. Um, I want to ask this question, and this question goes to Rhoda Robinson. Do you think the impact of non-profit organizations or charity organizations setting up to say, okay, we're focusing on working with young people, do you think the impact is being felt? Let's be very honest with ourselves. This is a frank conversation. We're talking about issues on governance. We talk about issues on governance. We talk about gender issues also, or gender inclusion in governance. How impactful have been these organizations? Do you think it has gone, it has spring up into organizations that then spring up have gone to impact, this generation? Do you think do you think how realistic do you think those non-profits are set up, the impact evaluation for them?
Yeah,
To you as
I think I get what you mean. I think it's in two ways. First of all, when we talk about the influence and the importance of non-profits, we should also understand that non-profits are filling a gap, basically. So if non-profits do not exist, that gap would exist. There is only so much a government can do, especially in developing nations and underdeveloped nations. There's only so much a government can do to cater for its people and to manage the available resources to achieve sustainable development, basically. And when you look at the role of non-profits, especially in relation to education, empowerment, governance, environment, climate change research, a host of um, issues, developments in societal, you'll find that they play a very key role in ensuring that individuals and societies who would have in other instances been neglected or ignored are put on the forefront of those discussions and those benefits. And so that's one part of the role that they play. And then when you now look at the justification for the existence of non-profits, you find a lot of people say that you can't quantify the work that non-profits are doing because a lot of the work that they do, a lot of the interventions that they design and implement cannot be really evaluated. And this is usually in the case of when a non-profit has not really understood or implemented an evaluation, impact evaluation aspects of their work. So it's not as though they are not working. It's not as though they are not making change or they are not making impact in the realm that that they work. It's basically because there is very low or poor investment in the evaluation and scaling up of the work that different non-profits are doing. And it's a problem that a lot of non-profits find across different social issues or across different sectors that they contribute their own expertise in. I'll give you another instance. When you look at the case of climate change, for example, because of the importance of climate change on existence, you find that there is a lot of research that has gone into climate change activities or mitigation or interventions, basically. So there is more visibility for non-profits working in that realm because a lot of people are focusing in that realm. When you look at issues of food poverty, hunger, and availability of food, you find that not so many non-profits are in that are very visible in that sector because it has not really come to the limelight that much. Yes, a lot of international organizations are focused on it, but when you look at the grassroots organization, you find a lot of them do not have the capacity to push their work forward. But they are the ones that are supporting small scale farmers and women farmers. They are the ones that are ensuring that a lot of young people and children in local communities understand the impacts of climate change, understand the impacts of the environment, and the impact they have on the environment. So if you remove that gear, let me use the word gear that non-profits are in the entire ecosystem of development, you'll find that a lot of things would not work the way that they are, and a lot of efforts would be needed from both the private sector and the government sector to fill the gap that they so crucially are filling right now.
All right, thank you so much. I need to ask a question real quick from Mix. Make Room as an organization. Have you been able to maybe tell us briefly what Make Room is doing currently in terms of governance? Because I remember when we had the Make Room camp for 1 week stretch, bringing young people from different countries. How do we measure the impact in terms of what Make Room is doing in terms of infusing change or bringing young people who are young leaders together? Do you think, how do you evaluate the change? How do you evaluate the results, the progress reports?
Yeah, thank you, Stephen. I completely agree to what actually Rhoda said. What is the role of the non-governmental organizations or the civil society activism at large? I'm sorry, I'm very sick, so it's hard for me to talk. But it's exactly as Rhoda said, that NGOs are there to fill the gap, to do something that public institutions are not able to do or do very badly. And then we have the NGOs or the private sector coming in to help or to fill the gap, doing something what the public institutions cannot possibly do well enough. And in regard to impact, that is something that in the space of NGO work, we have seen in the past 5-7 years, it's coming in quite rapidly. If we have already before quite well managed to evaluate impact, assess results of certain products in the private sector, then in the NGO sector, it's something that's relatively new that has come into picture for the past 5 years, at least in Europe and in Asia. Maybe in Africa it's a little different, but that is the question that we keep asking ourselves every day, and try to also somehow mentor organizations and civil activists not to very much focus on numbers that a lot of organizations do, that we have done that and that many seminars, we have done that and that many workshops, or we have done this and that, or distributed that and that many food packs. But to look at it not from this quantitative perspective, but from the qualitative aspect. And that is the first step if you want to do a proper impact assessment of the activities that your organization do, to look at that you actually ask the end receiver of your service or the activity of your organization, how has this specific activity or something that I have done changed your life in a period of a day, 2 days, 3 days, 4 days, 5 days. And if you start looking at from that perspective, that's the first step you do to properly do normal impact assessment of the activities of your organization. And that is where you start. Not quantitative, but qualitative. Just to look of how possibly a certain thing that you have done with your organization has changed someone's life. And this is what we also try to do with Make Room, is that we don't look at numbers that much, but we very much try to evaluate the impact we do on the people that we meet or the certain initiatives that we do for certain people. So I think that is the first thing that we should look at.
Okay, I'm going to Owonikoko now. In terms of the private sector partnership, the public and the private sector partnership, how impactful has these helped your work? And if you were supposed to give a few recommendations in terms of the public and the private sector partnership, what are the recommendations that you need to give out?
All right, thank you so much, Stephen. The question you've had will probably take the whole day to answer effectively, because public-private partnership is a whole pack that would require a lot. But I'm going to speak briefly to it and maybe pick it up from the first question you asked, which I think is a very important question we should ask ourselves, given the amount of non-profits that spring up, especially in developing countries like Nigeria, and I'm sure in India as well, and a few other countries. And of course, it's important we start to ask some of these questions so that we can put things in perspective. And I'm going to speak to this a bit from my experience as a social performance, because I worked in the field of social performance for 2 years, where I saw in reality what public and private sector partnership is, and the role of the civil society sector in helping to ensure that public-private partnerships are effective. So, and I'll start with this. Traditionally, there are two primary drivers of prosperity and wealth. There's the private sector, the market, generally called the market in development economics, that is supposed to create value, right? Create prosperity. And that's the primary job of the private sector. And it's important to understand the primary jobs of each of the sector so that we can have a more effective PPP. So on the other hand, is a public sector whose primary responsibility is the distribution of wealth, right? And it's okay if the public sector creates wealth, but its primary responsibility is to distribute it so that we can address issues like inequalities, because by its very nature, the public sector will create inequalities. But by the nature of the public sector, it is to distribute this wealth, right? But in states, fragile states, developing contexts like Nigeria, like many other countries, where the state might be failing its role to distribute equitably, the wealth that is generated by the private sector. And largely, I personally, and this is a digression, I think the biggest challenge we have in the world is not necessarily poverty, but inequality, but that is debatable. And that's because, to a large extent, the world produces a lot of things. We do have a lot of resources that is not equally distributed. And that becomes the gap that many non-profit organizations, and by extension, broadly use the civil society organization or third sector feels, so that we can help in the redistribution of the wealth that the private sector is creating, and in certain ways, help to address inequality, which is natural to the private sector. If we consider non-profits and CSO in general from the micro point of view, at individual point of view, at small community point of view, it's filling a huge gap. Because let's take, for example, many of us grew up in communities where the government did not provide water. Thanks to the efforts of organizations like HACEY that goes around to create boreholes, that is how we are able to have water, right? Without those kind of intervention, those communities may never have water. And of course, we can't begin to talk about the ripple effect of not having water, from sanitation to hygiene, to the security and risk it poses to women, to men and children and all. Talk about education. Many of us went to schools where it's not necessarily public sector funded, but it is not fully private sector too, because if you go to private sector school, we probably will not be able to afford it. And those are the opportunities that the non-profit, the CSO, civil society organization provides. When you look at that in detail, especially still at the micro level, you think of job creations. How many young people in Nigeria, for example, will be out of jobs if we do not have as many non-profits that we have, right? You think of the immediate value creation. You think of tax. The government may not tax, non-profits for income, but we do pay, the payee, and other forms of tax and all. We're adding value to the public sector. You think of bridging the gap between the citizenry and the private sector. Many private sector organizations, they are out of touch with the community where they work. If not for the the conscience that is placed in them by civil society organizations, and this include the media and small groups, not necessarily registered, organized non-profits. So when we look at each of these components, you understand the true value of CSO. And as a matter of fact, I do not think any community will function optimally without the right amount of civil society organizations. And those are that's at the micro level. But looking at it at the macro level, the question now is, how many jobs will non-profits create? How sustainable are the water systems that organizations create? How many boreholes will organizations create, right? Part of the job of the public sector is creating a regulatory environment for the private sector to work to create policies and all. And we can begin to ask ourselves, we can talk of so many policies that would not exist without the private sector, without the civil society sector driving it, because in a lot of ways, people who are drivers of the public sector are largely disconnected from the reality of many rural and local communities. Likewise, most times the private sector, and where the bridging of that gap comes is in the CSO, the non-profit, because people who actively play in that sectors are those who are largely or mostly in touch with the reality of the hardship, of the grassroots inequality, and all of these issues that we face. Should we talk about how to make non-profits more effective? Absolutely. And I agree totally with everything Rhoda said, because it's not just enough that we have all of these non-profits who are mobilizing resources. It's even more important that we are able to evaluate our impact and coordinate our impact so that some of these changes we are making or we are pushing to happen can happen in a sustainable and scalable way. And of course, in the recent time, there's been a lot of talk around social enterprises. And the way I see social enterprises is the blend between the regular nonprofit and the business, using business ideas to drive, social enterprises. And of course, I think there's a major shift from the regular traditional nonprofit to now social enterprises, where people who are impact conscious are able to run their operations using business model. In all, the summary from me is non-profit are very impactful, but I think there's still a lot that should be done in terms of making sure that the kind of investment that goes into many of these non-profits are able to translate to development outcomes. Because I've seen a lot of non-profit work that actually cause more harm than good, out of lack of skills, lack of proper operational processes to make sure some of these initiatives are sustainable, lack of resources, and poor environment created by the government and sometimes the private sector. I'll stop there so that I don't take a lot of time, but I'm sure we'll be able to keep having this conversation.
All right, thank you,
Professor. Before we continue, can I just
hop
on? Yeah, I just wanted to expand, just touch briefly on what Owonikoko had said about non-profits being bridging the gap between both the government and the people, and private sector and the people. And you find that a lot of times when it comes to advocacy, a lot of people bank on non-profits or non-governmental organization to be that voice that they need to be the ones to carry out the research, to do the lobbying, to make the noise, walk on the streets, to basically be the face and the voice that they want to use to create a change or have their own voices heard. And I think this is one role that a lot of people do not appreciate non-profits enough for, because it's one thing to know what's wrong. It's another thing to be able to stand up and speak against what is wrong and be able to stand up and identify who can make the change and walk them through making that change as well. And that's when you're talking about advocacy towards the government angle, and when you're talking about policy change and things like that. In respect to the private sector, you find a lot of times, as Owonikoko said, the private sector really is focused on profit making. How do they expand and make money or bring in resources? And sometimes, most times actually, they are very disconnected from the communities that host them. And without non-profits, without non-governmental organizations to guide them in their engagements with their community, you'll find that a lot of damage that some private sector do to environment and to communities would have gone unchecked. And a lot of times they would not understand the needs of their host community. They would not understand the social needs of their markets to be able to fully respond to that need and build a better system, economy or ecology, basically, for that society. So I just wanted to add that before we move on.
Sorry. Oh, I wanted to ask a question before I go to Mix. Some few minutes just to add up. I wanted to ask you about this. This is a very vital question. I want to ask you. I know you've been involved in the stopping the advocacy sensitization on female genital mutilation. You've been involved in a lot of advocacy lobbying on the area of violence against women, which I know this is something you are very keen in doing right now. and also quite a number of reproductive health. In lobbying with the government, now the government are more strategic. They are the main policy. They are the one to enact the law, put the law in place, and also, so how much do you think? And this is also measurable to other African people in the advocacy space in Africa. Our governments are so tough in terms of getting things done. How do you think? Because we're now talking about young people inclusion in governance, young people inclusion in governance at the local level, at the federal level, at the state level. How do you think we as social advocates can mainstream or work hand in hand or partner with the government? Sometimes they're very tough, and. So, what are the methodology you've been using? Because I see that you have a very good case study that's in terms of partnering with the government. What are the measurements that you are using in terms of lobbying with the government?
Was that a question for me?
It's for Rhoda. Yeah, Rhoda work with government a lot, so I need to know what are the measures in terms of lobbying. Then I go to you, Mixed.
Okay, but Mick, if you want to answer it, please go ahead. I can just wait till after.
Mixed, have you worked hand in hand with government?
No, I can. Obviously, I work with government on daily basis, but in regard to, for example, in Nigeria or be it also in India, what I've seen from my own experience, mentoring and helping organizations, non-governmental organizations, to partner with government public institutions in regard to, for example, amending certain laws or drafting policies to be adopted. What I have realized with a lot of Western African governments is that the governments are very lazy. The politicians are very, very lazy. And it's not about that they don't want to somehow push for a better change, but it's just that they don't want to do the work. So if an organization or a group of activists can come and do most of the hard work in analyzing, creating public discussions, getting private sector involved, doing analysis, drafting the bill, gathering signatures from different politicians, bringing everybody to the same table. If an NGO or a group of people is ready to do all of that, and that is hard work and it takes time, then I have rarely seen politicians saying no to certain things. It's just that they don't want to do the work that has to be done, and that is what I see, for example, with a lot of things also in Nigeria or a lot of different African governments in Western Africa. I don't know if that's your experience, Rhoda. That's just my perspective from a few instances that I've seen.
Rhoda, right now.
Yes, it's true in most cases. We've first and foremost, policymakers are policymakers. They are not scientists. They are not sociologists. They are not anthropologists. They are basically policymakers. So a lot of times they will not go into the communities to ask what is wrong or how they can change things. So as a non-governmental organization or as an impact organization or change maker, if you can bring evidence-based advocacy to a policymaker and are able to convince them of the importance and need of that change for the people, majority of the times you will find that they're willing to listen and they are willing to support you when you have everything done. As Mick said, when you've done all the hard work of getting the support, doing the analysis, bringing your evidence, doing everything it takes to make sure that you have a policy ready, they are most of the times willing to put their name on it and push it through. So that role can be carried by a lot of non-profits and a lot of non-governmental organizations. And it's most times what people do when we talk about advocacy. You bring evidence-based research to them and say, this is what is happening. This is what the people need. This is what it would look like if it doesn't happen. This is what it will look like if it does happen. And this is the role that you can play, because sometimes you have to spell it out. You have to show them where they need to sign, where they need to stand up, where they need to speak up, and provide a different platform sometimes for them to actually make that voice or make that stand. And at the end of the day, you find that if truly your goal is to make that policy change, in time you would reach that goal. It took a lot of years, a lot of organizations working on the same thing to get House of Senate or different states to sign on to the VAP Act. It took a lot of advocacy, a lot of years, a lot of community engagement, a lot of stakeholder engagements, key influencers to come together and push for different states developing their own domestic violence and sexual violence policies and laws. So it's a coming together of non-profits that really pushes the change that we need. And as Owonikoko said, we need to understand the role different people or different sectors play in development. Sometimes the government is just there to put an okay. Sometimes you are the one that does all the work. Sometimes the private sector is bringing in their technology, their technical know-how, their funding to make sure that you can do your work better. And when you've done your work, you've done your research, you've designed your solution, when you go to the government and push it there, because they are still responsible for the people that you want to reach. You cannot ignore the government at the end of the day. So they have to be part of that change process. And you going into a community without them it's going to be very difficult for whatever intervention you have designed to be sustainable at the end of the day, because you need that political will to have it continue in that society. And you need the buy-in of the states, the federal, the states, the local government, and the community itself to be able to ensure that whatever intervention you've designed and designed with them is solving a problem and is going to be sustainable at the end of the day. Yeah.
All right, thank you so much. We have a question. We have a question on the screen by Pastor Harrison. How do we now bridge the gap between government organization and NGO together to create a harmonious outcome that will lead to the entire development of the people?
So,
okay, go ahead.
Yeah, if I can jump on that. I think that's a very important question. To summarize what Rhoda was trying to say is the fact that the biggest level of change we can achieve is a policy, having a policy in place to guide something. However, that biggest level of change in a place like in many developing countries or fragile states is just a step, because the implementation of those policies is one step. You can imagine how much effort it takes to advocate and influence policymakers to create one policy and pass it and make it approved. But it probably takes times 3 or times 4 to have them implemented. And that's because the implementation is now a function of change in behavior. It's now a function of change in culture. And the way a people have behaved like all their lives cannot change overnight, even though there is one policy. And that is why the work of a non-profit would always be required, even after the bill is passed. So now answering this question, one thing Rhoda have mentioned and highlighted, and we have seen in our work at Project Enable Africa, because the discrimination prohibition against persons with disability discrimination act was signed just about 2 years ago, after a lot of advocacy and all. But even after it has been signed, there's still a lot of work to be done, right? One thing that is clear is we have to get to a point where we understand truly that no matter what we do, and that's the difference between the micro level and macro level, you can do all of this effort as an organization and reach just 20,000 people of the 200 million people that may be affected about an issue. We have to get to a point where we understand that we have to work with the government. Like, we cannot run away from the government. No matter how disorganized, how it seems that they are against the progress of the people, we have to understand that we must work with them. That's the number one thing. And that is a consciousness. That is a thinking. And when we have that thinking, then we begin to factor it into our program's design. That as much as we try to work. So one of the things we've been doing at Project Enable in the last 1 or 2 years is upskilling persons with disability, getting them jobs. But we know that is how many people are we going to place in jobs? 200, 2,000 people, right? So we are beginning to incorporate actively in our work. How can we get the government to make this thing compulsory, such that for every 100 organization, there is 50 slots reserved for persons with disability? It's in the bill, it's in the act that was signed, but is it implemented? No. So the next step we are taking is, okay, it is in the national bill. Can we now work with organizations to create organization level policies that ensure that what is in the national bill reflects in the organization processes, right? So you can see the way we are working it down. Even though the government's nationwide implementation is a target, now we are working with these direct stakeholders, the providers of employment, to make sure these things happen. So the first thing is understanding that this is important because political will is important. The second one is creating opportunity to speak with government, to have roundtable engagement, and it cannot all be official all the time. Sometimes it is informal. Sometimes it is formal, sometimes it is semi-formal. But the point is, let's bring this conversation about certain issues up to the government, and let's use every network and resource we have to engage in advocacy. I do not think that whatever you do, you can do without advocacy. If you're really concerned about making that change permanent, except you just want to operate at the micro level, there has to be a part of your organization that is focused on advocacy, on speaking to government, bringing stakeholders to have conversation. And that is very important. And the third one, I believe, is a challenge I've seen sometimes with funders. When funders just want to invest in direct programming without investing also in advocacy, because advocacy might be difficult to budget or cost for, and I think Rhoda might agree with this, but it costs a lot of money, because sometimes it's difficult to say to pay or to cost the time you go to visit, to have conversation, to carry out researches. But these things actually cost money, and that is where it becomes difficult for many non-profits, because again, it is not adequately funded, but it is required to have the kind of change we want. So, and I think funders also should start looking in that direction of dedicating a part of their resource into supporting organizations to carry out some level of advocacy, either full-fledged advocacy or contributing to the advocacy efforts of some other organization. It could just be research. It could be, and that's the important place of monitoring and evaluation, bringing together the learnings from your projects so that we can have a combined learning from several projects that becomes evidence that we take to policymakers. And I think when we start from there, we'll be on to, working with government to bridge some of this gap. Thank you.
All right, then. I want to ask a question, and this either or Dr. Owonikoko or Rhoda or Nick can answer this question. Whether we like it or not, in some part of African countries now, we are at a very, very interesting period of making decision who is going to be our leader. I know in Kenya, I know in one or two African countries and some other countries, they are at the point of deciding who is going to be the president of the country. Especially, I'm going to speak about Nigeria right here. And I've seen a lot of courageous young people come out to say, yes, I'm going to contest for president. I had Khadija. Khadija was on a show some few weeks back, which she's contesting boldly, that she wants to be the president of Nigeria. How realistic do you think young people coming into taking the leadership of the nation will go an extra mile in making Africa, or young people in African countries coming out to say, in Kenya, in Ghana, in Mozambique, and other countries saying that, no, we don't want to leave the fate of this country into the hands of our respectful leaders. We need to take up the challenge in terms of taking decisions of our own fate and our own future. How realistic do you think this decision in young people coming out with no experience will go an extra mile in making the country mega, or changing the face of, not a repeated occurrence of recycled leadership, and we're still balling out the same in terms of the country development? I don't know who is ready to answer this question. Maybe Rhoda or Owonikoko, who is ready to answer this question?
Well, I can start
Okay,
if
go
that
ahead.
is fine. I'm sure the others will jump on it. So the questions around political participation is central to the work we do at the Carrington Fellowship Network. As a matter of fact, when we're creating our 2 year strategy around April last year, it was largely built around driving electoral participation, political participation in general for young people. And the question of is, are we able to transition power from the recycled leaders to younger people right now? I think it's a complex one to answer. On the surface, I would say yes, we have lots of young, capable people. But we must also realize that many of these older people that we think we have recycled enough are people who have also built mechanisms, structures that support their political careers, as it were. Some of these structures we haven't built, many of we young people. It's not just that we haven't built, we have not even mastered the way to leverage the existing structures that is already built by many of these leaders that we term recycled, right? And in some ways, it is deliberate for them to keep it that way, to make sure the entry into some of this political party and system is really high and difficult for young people. Because the moment they make it easier, then any young person might be able to jump in and will threaten them. Because we do have the numbers, we do have the capacity. One advantage they have is those structures that they have painstakingly built over the years. And I don't want us to start mentioning names now, but we know many key politicians here in Nigeria who have in the past 20 years built their own political mechanisms that is able to deliver the results for them at short notice, right? I would say that for every young person who is interested, who feel inspired to run for office, it's by all means, please go ahead. Because it is not just one strike that will break the rock. It's going to be several. And each of the steps and the actions that we take would contribute to that process. But more importantly, I would say that we need to play the long-term game. We have elections next year. If I do decide to come out now and run, right, as much as I have a chance, I'm a citizen, I have my right to be voted for. But the question is, do I have the grassroots mechanisms? Do I have the system? Do I have even a proper understanding of the politics around there sufficient for me to springboard on to a possible win? Right? Those are the questions I want to ask myself. Or do I want to invest in the next 4 years where I begin to do a lot of grassroots mobilization, building network, encouraging people, building my own network, mobilizing people and positioning to leverage on all of that mechanism that I build on against the next 4 or 5 years? So these are some of the tough questions we have to answer as young people. But for us at the Carrington Fellowship, what we are doing actively is in the next couple of months, we are going to be having town hall meetings in all local governments in Nigeria, mobilizing women, mobilizing young people, encouraging them to get their PVC, mobilizing them to vote, but more importantly, contributing to the strengthening of our own sort of political mechanism that we can leverage on and build things on in few years to come. But I don't think that mechanism will be ready in a short while.
Yeah. Going on what Owonikoko has said, politics is a living organism. It's like it exists on its own. So for you to be able to conquer it, you have to understand it. You can't go in with I have a policy that says I can run as a young person. If you don't understand what happens there, if you don't have the right backing, if you don't understand the structures that is there, you get kicked out immediately. And then that might discourage a lot of young people from even going there in the first place. I remember early 2012, 13, 14, HACEY did a lot of advocacy about getting young people, especially women, to start getting interested in running for office and things like that. And one of the major things we found out was that a lot of people do not even understand what happens there. So how do you educate people who are then they were like 20, 21, 25, and now we have them at 35 going to 40, and not much has changed in their understanding of politics, in their understanding of leadership. But these are the same young people that want to run, or we've been encouraging to run. So we need to first start with having them understand where they are going to. Let them have that knowledge. It's like working in a government. You can't just graduate from school and become a director immediately. It doesn't happen that way. There are steps you need to take. You can't fly. You can't jump the gun. You need to go step by step. You need to start to understand what happens at the local level, what happens at the state level, what happens at the different arms of the government. How does that play into where you want to see yourself in the next 5, 10 years? And as Owonikoko said, it is not a short-term goal. The people that are there now, they've been in politics before I was born. So they understand, they built that system to keep them there. So if you want to change a system like that, you have to understand what makes it tick and be able to change it from both the outside and the inside as well. I'll just stop there for a while because I need to connect my system again. So
Okay.
give me a minute.
Okay. Mix. Education plays a very important role in nation building. What are the strategic, if you're supposed to give recommendations to government, maybe African leaders, you're invited to speak to African leaders, and we know the level of our education right now. Schools are on strike, universities are on strike, and it's more or less like a working corpse. Nigerian education is like a working corpse right now. What are few recommendations you think, that realistic recommendations that you can give to government? That I know the education that you have, it's not like the education that we have in Africa. And you've worked with young African leaders, you work with young Africans, young change makers, you work with across African country, and traveling to Rwanda and traveling to different countries where you also have chapters of Make Room. So if you have the opportunity to meet with African leaders, what are the few recommendations you give to them in terms of education?
Thank you, Stephen, for the question. Well, at least the young people that I met when I was in Lagos and in Nigeria in 2017, you guys are smart. Nigerians are very, very smart. And the young people especially, they are very, very smart. They are such problem solvers, because what we see in Europe, for example, and is that we know our young people, they know a lot of theory, they study very hard, they have a lot of opportunities, but then once they are put into some sort of a field to solve some sort of a problem, they struggle. And I think this is where what I saw, at least when I was in Nigeria and when I worked with young people in Lagos, is that young people in Nigeria, maybe you lack some sort of theoretical, some sort of academic knowledge. But once you are put in some sort of an environment where you have to come up with some sort of innovative solution to a problem, then people don't have that problem. And in regard to education, I think it's what we need to do is we need to, instead of raising young doctors, engineers, or asking young people, what do you want to be when you grow up, we should be asking, like, what problem do you want to solve and what skills do you need to solve that problem. I think that is the question that we should be asking. But I wouldn't say that the education that I have gained, at least in Europe, is a lot better. Maybe the opportunities are there a lot more, but the education, I don't know. It's a good question to ask.
Okay, I'm going to ask this question, and I wish any one of us have seen the video of Dr. Owonikoko was in the US, where during the Obama time, he was a star boy during that conference, and you asked question from President Obama during that meeting, the Imagine Young Leaders meeting that you had in the US. If you are supposed to sit, and I saw the courage that you have, and in facing off to the president, if you were supposed to have that platform again to meet different world leaders, looking at the situation of what is going on in the world, in Russia, Ukraine, there's unrest everywhere. What are the few let's go back to Africa. Let's leave Ukraine right out of it right now. But what are the few recommendations that you think you can give to African leaders? Because I think that they need a lot of reorientation. What exactly are the few recommendations that you can give to world leaders, in terms of your own recommendation and your own submission, and looking at your own inputs and relationship with young people across African countries?
Thank you. Thank you for making a reference to the question at the time I asked President Barack Obama a question a few years ago. I've always been very vocal on the fact that an educational curriculum needs a reform, because I think Nigeria, for example, our curriculum is not adapted to our reality, and that's my home point of view. Hello, I hope you can still hear me. I think
we can hear you. We can hear you clearly.
Oh, great. Yeah, so that would be the very first thing. We need to redesign our curriculum to meet our own needs. Many of the things that are contained in our curriculum were things that were imported directly from the British curriculum many years ago. The interesting fact, however, is that even that curriculum, the origin of the British curriculum, has moved. They have innovated and they have continued to adapt their curriculum to their own reality. But looking at ours, it has remained the same. If you go back to school, for example, Rhoda, you probably left the university, say 10, 12 years ago. I can guarantee you that your notes is still likely going to be the same with the notes that is still being disseminated to students. The content is the same. And that's where the problem is. I do not think that we have lack of innovation. I think what we lack is adaptation. Our capacity to adapt new solution, curriculum to the reality of the context that we are in. That is one. Secondly, is the very important need to return history to our curriculum. We need to understand where we have been as a people, and that comes from simple things like teaching of history, so that we can even understand what challenges we have faced and where we are and how we can move on. That is also very important. And the third part is, as we do this adaptation in our curriculum, we should make it more flexible, such that it can respond to 21st century challenges, and it's even more practical to meeting the needs of today. The world of work is changing fast. New challenges are rising, right? There are several things we need to address. If going to school do not help us address things, then we do not need to go to school. Going to school is a waste. How do I go to school for the 6334, curriculum years, and I still cannot get direct employment in a functional company? If I still have to be retrained and then I'm still termed unemployable, then why are we going to school? If I've spent 21 years of my life going to school almost every day and I cannot fit into the industry, then there is a gap. It's time we go back to the industry and bring all the necessary stakeholders, historians, the representative of the industry, private sector, public sector, and ask ourselves questions. What should our educational curriculum achieve? Once we answer that question, then let's go back to redesign. Some of the things I learned in school were absolutely irrelevant to me. The things that were relevant, I did not learn. I started to learn after I left school. Those are the questions we should be asking ourselves. I did my master's degree in the UK, and that 1 year of studying at the University of Sussex, I felt it added more value to me than many, many years I've spent up until that time. And that was because I was able to jump on relevant current issues, analyze them, address them, discuss relevant theories, and found ways to turn them to practice. And that way, I think that added more value to me. So to recap, to talk about what I'd mentioned again, the first one is, let us redesign our curriculum to meet the needs. The second one is, let us bring back history. We need perspective in some of these things that we study. And the third one is, how can we make our education relevant to today's problem, tomorrow's problem? Until we do those things, going to school is just what we do out of tradition, not necessarily out of fitting into the world of today. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Okay, Rhoda, you wanted to react?
Yes. I'm very interested in education because I'm an alumni of an education-based fellowship, Reformers Network, where it's designed to look at the education system. And one of the main things that we've seen is that, as Owonikoko said, the problem with our curriculum is that it is archaic, it is not flexible, it does not grow, it is not changing. The problems it is solving don't exist anymore. It was designed to create people to solve specific problems. Right now, the education system is not creating people that are solving our current problem. If we were in 50 years ago, our curriculum would have been perfect. We would get everything right. But right now, we're in an age where technology is rolling. We're in an age where you need to learn on the go. You need to be adaptable. But our education system does not teach that. I went to the University of Ilorin, and I always say I was lucky enough to have met lecturers who were forward thinking, who taught in the future, who help you understand that the reason you are in school is to learn how to learn and how to identify problems and how to solve problems. So I was lucky. Our entire education system is not built that way. Our lecturers are not built that way. So even the people that are supposed to be teaching the students don't understand the concept of education anymore. And everybody is so fixed on the fact that they have to go to university that they forget that the reason you are getting an education is to solve a problem or to make a change. So if you are not in a space where you are learning a skill to solve an existing problem, you are in the wrong space. If you are not supposed to be in university, do not be in university. Learn a skill that would help you solve an existing problem. Not everyone needs to go to university as it stays, because we need to understand why we are learning what we are learning. Our educational system does not teach us that. So we might be learning the foundations of biology, we might be learning history, we might be learning the basics of physics, but how does that apply to current realities? How do you apply your knowledge of how the human system works? Sorry, I read human physiology. So how do you apply the knowledge of how the human system works to solve diseases, to create technology, that biotech that would solve our current health problems? So that's the way our system is supposed to think. But we are so stuck in the industrial age that we've forgotten to move that skill to the needs of the current age. And I think that's what we really, really need. We need to be able to evolve our education system as the world is evolving and as new problems are coming along.
All right, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Rhoda. Because we're going to round up now, but I'm going to just go read the comment from people. Thank you, White Bureau, that called all the way from Germany right now. Well said. My addition is that politics, not sorry, politics that's not wrong. Sorry, well said. My addition is that politics, not an ad hoc endeavor. Some of us have been at some of us has been at it for some times now, and we are not getting a hold of it. Shola Anima Shaun also commented, and his comment is the what problem do we want to solve when you grow up, and how do you want to solve it? And that's a question for some of us who are here. That's a brilliant point, and also I have another pointer. This still bounce back to the policy table. Okay, I'm going to ask this question as we round up the show, and this question goes to, I guess, Owonikoko, so not Owonikoko, to Rhoda. And you also have been in the forefront of the policy implementations, negotiation with other leaders or political leaders, with the policymakers themselves. Both from the non-profit sector, you've been at different UN meetings, the World Bank meeting, at different international meetings. Seeing what is going on in the world right now, what are the basic few recommendations you can give to young people? And if we're talking about leadership is by looking at those people ahead of us. If we ask ourselves and be very proactive with ourselves and ask ourselves a question, which of the world leaders do you think you want any of your mentee to be like? I hope you understand the question. Which of the African leader do you think you want your protege to be like? Is it Mugabe? Is it Obasanjo? Is it Atiku? Is it mention the name of the world leaders? Is fine. But what are the few recommendations you can give to leaders and you can give to young leaders, young people who are also advocating for leadership? We have a lot of few of our friends, and and Owonikoko is also here, who are vying for political offices, in few months from now. What are your few recommendations? Because for me, I think it's the same thing, coming from the advocacy space, and some of them are in power right now. I don't see a difference in them and the old leaders, the old wagon leaders. So what are the few recommendations that you can give to these young people who are vying, who are so interested, who are so keen in going for leadership?
I think to answer that, I will just read back Shola Animashaun's question of what do you want to be when you grow up and what problem do you want to solve. I think that's the mentality every young person who is going into politics or who wants to be a political leader needs to put at the forefront, not at the back of their mind, at the forefront of their mind, that what exactly are they going to change? So, regardless of everything, what is the problem that they have seen and they want to change? For every young person that comes up to me and says, "Oh, they like what I do and they want to do something similar. What should they do?" and everything. The simple thing I tell them is see a need, find a need, and feel that need. It's as simple as that. So when you find a problem, work towards solving that problem. And then when you work towards that goal, every other thing that you are doing will seem to fall into place, and you will have you would have created the impact that you want to see, either directly or indirectly. So for every young person that wants to go into a leadership position, be it political, private, non-profit, government, what I always say is that what are you going to solve? What problem are you going to solve? Are you trying to solve? And that should guide your manifesto, that should guide your campaign messaging, that should guide the people that are on the same bandwagon as you. Because if you do not share the same vision, you'll find that it's either you are working harder than you should be, or that you get distracted along the way and then you lose focus and then you become like every other person. And the system that doesn't work sucks you into it as well, and then you become just like every other recycled leader out there, only you're now a younger ineffective leader. So find the need, stick with your need, and then use that power or that position that you're going to fill that need.
All right, thank you so much. Owonikoko, any final thoughts before we round up the show? Dr. Owonikoko.
Yes. So my final thoughts would be that first of all, remember that we are no longer in the industrial age. Rhoda mentioned very boldly, implied that the current education system we have is made for the industrial age. And I agree completely. The age of garbage in, garbage out, when you work with machines, you don't have to think a lot. The problem has been solved by a genius who created the machine, and you just, garbage in and garbage out. But to understand we're no longer in that age. And I think our policymakers too should understand. But we must realize that keeping our educational curriculum this way is a strength for those who do not want development. I think that we should remember. I do not think some of these politicians or policymakers do not know that we need an overhaul. What they do know is that if they make that change to happen, then their stand will be threatened. And it has become a tool for the perpetuation of poverty, or is a tool that serves the poverty industry, like I like to say. That is one. The second thing is for leaders. I think this is my biggest message for young people who want to go into leadership. Do not go alone. I don't see anybody surviving if you go alone. And of course, anyways, one of the best things we can do is to mobilize people, find like-minded people, like 3, 4, 5, build a network. Let's invest a lot in network. If you're going to participate actively in politics, and get your network to participate at the grassroots level. Otherwise, I don't see how any one individual will survive amidst the shark. It's like going into the lion's den. No matter how brave you are, you get tired, you get worn out, and it's difficult. That would be my. Unfortunately, I don't have any current African leader I would like anybody to be like. The closest to it may be the president of Rwanda, and because I've recently visited Rwanda and I think things are working there, but I'm also careful to quickly recommend President Kagame. I would wait until succession happens before I give him all the credit, but I think he's doing a great job. However, I do not recommend anybody for now. Let's all be our own leader. Let's build our own vision, and let's go ahead to make change happen. But ultimately, I think the highlight of this conversation for me was a word, a sentence I'll credit to. I think his name is Mist, right? The first speaker, when he said we should stop asking question of what do you want to be when you grow up. I think that is also in Michelle Obama's book, Becoming, as if growing up is a destination and you finally stop growing. The question we should ask, which he just gave to me, and I credit that to him, is what problem do you want to solve? And what skills do you need to acquire to be positioned to solve those problems? A friend once told me, and this is my final words, that the reason my birth was celebrated when my mother gave birth to me wasn't because anyone was interested in eating jollof rice. I mean, if you're Nigerian, you understand that, or chicken. It's basically because everybody expected that I am a piece of the puzzle to the problems that the world has. And if I'm not solving that problem, then maybe I shouldn't be here. I think for me, that is my biggest contribution and takeaway. Thank you.
Okay. Any final thoughts, Rhoda? And then we call, any final thoughts?
I just to support what Owonikoko has said. As an individual, you should find a way to impact your society positively, to make the change that you want to see. And as I said, not always asking what your society can do for you or what your government can do for your society, for what your government can do for you, but what you can contribute to your society as well. Thank
All
you.
right. Thank you so much. 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 Oh, sorry. Sorry. Oh, God. Okay, thank you so much for all our guests that joined us today. Thank you, Mix. Thank you, Rhoda Robinson. Those are my big mentors. Thank you, Dr. Owonikoko too, for joining us on the show, and thank you, Omotola Ayodele. Thank you, Olufemi Bitoye. Thank you, Pastor Harrison. Thank you, Igwe. Is it Igwe? Thank you, Dr. Wahidi Adebayo. Thank you, Dr. Shola Nimashaun. Thank you, Igoho. Thank you, Joy Ifi. Thank you, Olufemi, like I said earlier on, for joining us on today's show. We still thank you. We're so sorry that we started the show a bit tight today for people who are here in the US because we had a bit of change in time zone or overnight, and we're just like 5 hours behind you guys. We're 6 hours yesterday, but today we're 5 hours. Thank you so much. We're still going to we're expecting us here next Sunday on the Bold Conversation, as we have another guest, our guest join us on the show next Sunday. Thank you so much, Rhoda, for joining us. You've been a sort of inspiration to this generation. Thank you, Owonikoko, for being a bundle of inspiration too. And thank you, Mix, for joining us. I'd like to say thank you to everybody who has joined us across the world, in the US, in Kenya, in different parts, in Ghana. We'd like to say thank you and see you same time next week. As we round up, I always say, together we aspire, together we achieve, together we make great things happen, for we can, we would, we must. See you same time next week. God bless you.